You are just a low-life girl who is totally broke and sells tomatoes. What can you offer a pretty girl like me? How dare you speak to me like that? I work hard won't make you rich. Working hard? Laughs. Well, it's not my fault that your father didn't work hard to give you a better life.
They laughed at her every day in the market, but what they didn't know was that this poor girl owned everything they stood on. Ada did not look like someone who carried secrets. She looked like someone who carried bags. Every morning, before the sun had fully opened its eyes, Ada was already at her auntie's stall in the market, arranging groundnuts in neat rows, stacking tomatoes carefully, and wiping the wooden table with an old cloth until it shone. She never complained. She never looked tired. She just walked, quietly, steadily, like someone who had decided that peace was more valuable than noise. People passed her stall every day. Some smiled. Some ignored her. And some, like Vanessa, made it their personal mission to remind Ada of exactly where she stood in this village. It was a Tuesday morning when Vanessa first stopped at Ada's stall. She did not stop to buy anything. She stopped to laugh. Vanessa was wearing a pink dress that cost more than Ada's entire week of sales, and she had two friends behind her like shadows, always nodding, always giggling at whatever Vanessa said. She looked at Ada from head to toe, the way someone looks at a piece of furniture they are deciding to throw away. Then she said, loudly enough for the whole market to hear, "Is this the new poor girl everybody is talking about? The one living with the groundnut woman?" Her friends burst out laughing. Ada looked up slowly. She said nothing. She only smiled, a small, quiet smile that confused Vanessa more than any insult could have. That smile made Vanessa angry. She was not used to being ignored. Her father was Chief Raymond, the man who held meetings, settled disputes, and collected fees from every trader in the market. In this village, Chief Raymond's word was law. And his daughter, Vanessa, had grown up believing that this law applied to people's feelings too. She had grown up pointing at things and getting them. Pointing at people and breaking them. So when Ada smiled and went back to arranging her tomatoes without a single word, Vanessa felt something she had never felt before, small. And that feeling made her dangerous. "Enjoy your tomatoes, poor girl," Vanessa said, flipping her hair. "At least they are worth something. You are not." Then she walked away, laughing. The whole market watched. Nobody said a word. Ada's auntie, Mrs. Flora, had seen everything from the back of the stall. She came and placed her hand gently on Ada's shoulder. "Are you okay, my child?" she whispered. Ada nodded slowly. "I am fine, auntie," she said softly. "Let her talk." Mrs. Flora looked at her niece with tired, knowing eyes that carried a truth too heavy for the market to hold. Because Mrs. Flora knew something the whole village did not know. She knew exactly who Ada was. She knew why Ada had come. And she knew that the day this village discovered the truth, nothing would ever be the same again. She squeezed Ada's shoulder once, went back to her seat, and began to hum an old song, the kind of song that sounds like a warning dressed in melody. Before we continue, if you love emotional stories with shocking twists like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because this story is about to get crazy. Chief Raymond had ruled this village for 22 years. He sat at the head of every meeting. He received gifts during every celebration. He decided who could build where, who could trade what, and who deserved respect. The people called him the chief. The elders bowed their heads when he entered a room. Even the teachers at the village school spoke carefully when his name came up. To everyone who lived there, Chief Raymond was the owner of everything, the land, the rules, and the future. He wore his authority like a coat he never took off, even in the heat of the afternoon. And he had made sure his daughter Vanessa grew up wearing the same coat, even though it was not theirs to wear. What the village did not know was that Chief Raymond was not the owner of anything. He was a caretaker, a man placed in a position of trust years ago, when the true owners of the land were far away and needed someone responsible to manage things. The original agreement was clear: he would oversee the village, collect payments on behalf of the landowners, and keep careful records. But over the years, Chief Raymond had done something very human and very wrong. He had started to believe his own story. He stopped mentioning the real owners. He stopped keeping records. He began collecting money for himself, rewriting old agreements, and speaking as if the land had always been his. And because nobody challenged him, he kept going, deeper and deeper into a lie that now had 22 years of roots. Vanessa had grown up inside that lie and had never once questioned it. Why would she? She had a big house. She had fine clothes. She went to the best school in town and came back with certificates that hung on the wall like trophies. When she walked through the market, traders smiled at her, not out of love, but out of caution. She mistook that caution for respect, and it made her proud in all the wrong ways. She spoke to people as if they owed her something. She mocked those who struggled. She used her father's name as a weapon, dropping it into conversations the way you drop a stone into still water, just to watch it disturb everything. "Do you know who my father is?" was her favorite sentence, and she used it often. But there was one trader in the market who did not flinch when Vanessa dropped that sentence. One girl who heard it and said nothing, not because she was afraid, but because she knew something Vanessa did not. Ada had come to this village for a reason, and that reason had nothing to do with selling tomatoes. She had come to see. She had come to understand. And most importantly, she had come to decide. Every insult Vanessa threw at her, every laugh, every public embarrassment, Ada stored it all, not in anger, but in memory. She was building a picture of this village, one moment at a time. And the picture was becoming very clear. Word spread fast in this village, the way rumors always do in small places where people have enough time to notice things. People began to talk about the quiet girl at Mrs. Flora's store. Some said she was an orphan. Some said she had run away from trouble somewhere. Some said Mrs. Flora had brought her to help with work because her old knees could not carry her through long market days anymore. Nobody had the real story, so everyone invented one. And the story they invented was always the same: Ada was poor, unlucky, and ordinary. It is a dangerous thing, what people decide about you before they even ask your name. Vanessa took full advantage of the story people had built around Ada. She came to the market regularly now, not to shop, but to perform. She would walk past Ada's store with her friends, say something cruel, and wait for the crowd to laugh. One afternoon, she pointed at Ada's worn sandals and announced, "Even the roadside children in the city dress better than this one." The crowd chuckled nervously. Another day, when Ada was measuring out rice for a customer, Vanessa walked over and said, "Make sure you measure correctly. Poor people cannot afford mistakes." Ada looked up, met Vanessa's eyes, and said calmly, "I always measure correctly, Ma. Would you like to buy some?" Vanessa blinked. That was not the response she expected. She expected tears, or anger, or at least embarrassment. She walked away faster than she intended. The children in the village began to watch Ada carefully. They noticed something the adults had missed: Ada never cried. She never shouted. She never went home looking broken. She went home looking thoughtful, the way someone looks when they are reading a book and the story is getting interesting. Some of the children started greeting her when they passed. One small boy named Kojo, who was 7 years old and missing his 2 front teeth, would run to Ada's store every afternoon after school and ask her to tell him a story. Ada always did. She told him stories about kings who did not know they were kings, and poor men who turned out to be the richest of all. Kojo listened with wide eyes. He did not know he was hearing Ada's own story, dressed up in someone else's clothes. At night, when the market was quiet and the village was dark, strange things happened at Mrs. Flora's house. A car would park far down the road, not outside the gate, but at a distance, careful not to attract attention. A man in a clean suit would walk to the door and knock 3 times. Mrs. Flora would let him in. Inside, Ada would sit at the table with paper spread before her, speaking quietly but seriously, like someone handling very important business. These men came from the city. They brought documents, photographs, and sealed envelopes with official stamps. After an hour or two, they would leave, the same quiet way they came. Mrs. Flora always locked the door behind them and whispered, "It is almost time, my child." And Ada would nod, gather the papers carefully, and say, "Not yet, Auntie. I am not finished watching." Vanessa's cruelty had no schedule, it arrived whenever it pleased, and it always pleased it to arrive when Ada was most visible. The day of the annual market celebration was one of the biggest days in the village. Traders decorated their stalls. Musicians played at the entrance. Children ran around with small flags. Everyone dressed in their best clothes, and the market smelled of fried food and joy. Ada had woken up early that morning and borrowed one of Mrs. Flora's old blouses, a blue one with small flowers, because she had nothing new to wear. She ironed it carefully. She braided her hair herself. She looked simple but neat, and she felt, just for that morning, like the celebration belonged to her too. Then Vanessa arrived. She came in a car. She stepped out wearing a yellow dress with gold earrings, and the market parted for her the way it always did. She looked around slowly, spotted Ada, and walked straight toward her. Her friends followed like always. Vanessa stopped in front of Ada's stall, looked at her outfit, and turned to her friends with a dramatic expression. "Is this what poor people call dressing up?" she said. The friends laughed. Nearby traders pretended not to hear. "You borrowed that blouse, didn't you?" Vanessa continued. "You can tell, it's too big for you. Everything about you is too small for this village." Ada stood very still. Her jaw tightened just slightly, just enough for Mrs. Flora to notice from across the stall. But Ada's voice, when she spoke, was completely steady. "Thank you for noticing me, Vanessa," she said. "Enjoy the celebration." That was all. Vanessa was not satisfied. She turned to the small crowd that had gathered, because crowds always gather when Vanessa performs, and said loudly, "Somebody tell this girl to go back to wherever she came from. This celebration is not for groundnut sellers." Some people laughed. Some looked away in discomfort. One old woman at a nearby stall kissed her teeth quietly. Kojo, who had been standing nearby with his flag, looked at Ada with big, worried eyes. Ada caught his eye and gave him the smallest wink. Then she turned back to her tomatoes and continued her walk, as if Vanessa were no more significant than a passing wind. That was the moment something shifted inside Vanessa, because she could not understand why this girl refused to break. And things we cannot understand have a way of frightening us. Chief Raymond heard about the market incident that evening. He was sitting on his veranda when one of his boys told him. He chuckled and waved his hand. "Let her be," he said, speaking about Ada. "She is nobody." But later that night, when he was alone, he felt a strange feeling in his stomach, not quite fear, but something close to it. He had heard the name Mrs. Flora. He had heard about the quiet girl living with her. And somewhere in the buried part of his memory, he remembered a name, a family name, connected to this land. A name he had spent 22 years trying to forget. He pushed the thought away and poured himself a drink. "Nobody," he said again to himself. But the word felt hollow this time, like a box that looks full but is completely empty inside. There is a kind of tiredness that has nothing to do with the body. It lives in the chest. It makes simple things feel heavy, like waking up, like smiling, like watching someone be cruel to you and choosing, again and again, to say nothing. Ada carried this tiredness every day, but she never let it show in daylight. At night, alone in the small room Mrs. Flora gave her, she would sit by the window and look at the village under the dark sky. She could see the rooftops, the quiet roads, the distant sound of someone's radio. And she would think, not with bitterness, but with a kind of deep, serious love, about what this place could become. What it deserved to be. What it had been prevented from being for 22 years. One evening, Mrs. Flora came and sat beside her. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then Mrs. Flora said, "Your mother used to sit like this. Exactly like this. Looking at the world as if she was deciding what to do with it." Ada smiled, a real smile this time, the kind that reaches the eyes. "She taught me to look before I act," Ada said. She said a person who truly sees will never make a mistake they cannot fix. Mrs. Flora nodded slowly. She was a wise woman. The wisest I ever knew. There was a pause. Then Ada said, "I miss her." Mrs. Flora reached out and held her hand. "She is why you are here," the old woman said gently. "Finish what she started." Ada turned back to the window. "I will," she whispered. And the way she said it, quiet, firm, and final, it sounded less like a promise and more like a decision that had already been made. The men from the city had now begun to visit more frequently. The sealed envelopes had become files. The files had become a thick folder tied with a red ribbon. Inside that folder were documents that told a story far older than Chief Raymond's 22 years, land records dating back 3 generations, signed agreements, official stamps, government certificates, and photographs of Ada's grandmother standing on this very land with a surveyor and 2 witnesses. Everything was there. Everything was real. And everything had been carefully hidden by Chief Raymond for decades, locked in his own cabinet, reclassified under his name, and buried under paperwork designed to confuse. But Ada's family had kept their own copies. Every single one. The last piece had arrived 3 days ago, a letter from the National Land Registry confirming Ada's identity and legal inheritance. She had read it 3 times, folded it carefully, and placed it at the very top of the folder. Then she had looked at the city man who brought it and said, "Tell them we are ready. Arrange the meeting." The man nodded and left quickly. Mrs. Flora, who had been listening from the doorway, came in and sat heavily in her chair. "So it begins," she said. Ada looked at the folder in her hands. Outside, she could faintly hear Vanessa's music playing in the big house across the road, loud, careless, and confident. Ada set the folder down. "Yes," she said simply. "It begins." At this point, what would you do if you were Ada? Crying face. Would you stay quiet or fight back? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe because the truth about Ada is about to change everything. The announcement came on a dry, bright Wednesday morning. Government vehicles, black and official-looking, rode into the village and parked in front of the community hall. Men in uniform stepped out carrying equipment. Behind them came others in suits, serious faces, briefcases, and the kind of calm that only belongs to people who hold real power. Word spread through the village like fire through dry grass. Traders left their stalls. Children pressed their noses against fences. Elders came out of their houses, adjusting their clothes and lowering their voices. Nobody had seen vehicles like these in this village before. Nobody knew who had called them. And Chief Raymond, who always knew everything that happened in his village before it happened, was the most confused of all. He dressed quickly and went to the hall. His trusted boys walked with him. When he entered, officials were already seated. One of them, a tall man with spectacles, looked up and nodded politely. "Chief Raymond," he said. "Please sit. We are expecting one more person." Raymond frowned. He was the chief. He did not sit and wait for people. He was the person people waited for. But there was something in the official's voice, respectful but immovable, that made him sit without argument. Vanessa had come along, dressed in her best, expecting a celebration of some kind. She sat beside her father, looking around with bright, curious eyes, already composing a story in her head about how her father was being honored today. Then Ada walked in. She entered through the side door, and she looked different, not in a dramatic, decorated way, but in the way a river looks different when it finally reaches the open sea. She wore a simple white dress. Her hair was clean and pressed back. She carried the thick red ribbon folder under her arm and walked with the kind of quiet confidence that fills a room without trying. Beside her walked Mrs. Flora, dignified, slow, and smiling. Behind them were 3 of the city men. The hall went completely silent. People looked from Ada to the officials, from the officials back to Ada. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. She did not understand what she was seeing. But she felt something she rarely felt, unease. "Who is that?" she whispered to her father. Chief Raymond said nothing. His face had gone very still. The tall official stood. He cleared his throat. He looked at the room, at the elders, at the traders who had squeezed inside, at the children peering through the windows, at Chief Raymond sitting stiff in his chair, and he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for gathering. We are here today on a matter of land, legacy, and legal ownership. We ask for your full attention." He paused. Ada sat down at the front table, across from Chief Raymond. She placed her folder carefully on the table. She looked up once, briefly, at Vanessa, who was staring at her with an expression caught halfway between confusion and fear. Ada did not smile. She did not frown. She simply turned her eyes back to the official and folded her hands. And waited. The official began to speak, and with every sentence, the air in the room grew heavier. He explained the history of the land, how it had been registered 3 generations ago in the name of a family. He spoke about a legal caretaker arrangement, a signed agreement from 22 years ago between that family and a man named Raymond, who was given authority to manage the land temporarily and pass income to the landowners. He explained that for many years, those payments had stopped. That records had been altered. That the legal heirs had been kept in the dark. As he spoke, Chief Raymond's hands, which had been resting on the table, slowly curled into fists. Vanessa looked at her father. He would not look at her. Then the official opened his own folder and brought out a series of documents. He laid them on the table one by one, like someone dealing cards in a very slow, very serious game. Old land certificates. A stamped agreement with 2 signatures, one belonging to Chief Raymond, one belonging to Ada's grandfather. Government correspondence. A court order confirming legal heirship. And finally, a photograph. A large, clear photograph of Ada's mother as a young woman, standing on this very land, next to a surveyor's marker, holding a document to the camera. "This is the original landowner's daughter," the official said, pointing to the photograph. "And the young woman seated before you today is her daughter, Ada, the legal and rightful heir to this land and everything managed on it." The room erupted. Not in chaos, in sound. Gasps. Whispers. Someone said, "God forbid," in a low voice. Elders turned to each other with wide eyes. Traders who had been standing at the back pressed forward. Kojo, little Kojo, who had somehow squeezed his way inside, stood on his toes to see, his mouth completely open. Ada sat still through all of it. She did not raise her hands. She did not speak. She let the truth do what the truth always does when it has been kept underground for too long, rise, and rise loudly. Chief Raymond finally looked up. His eyes moved to Ada, and for the first time in 22 years, he looked like a man without a coat. Vanessa stood up. "This is not possible," she said. Her voice was sharp, but there was a trembling underneath it. "My father has run this village for 22 years. Everyone knows him. He is the chief." The tall official looked at her calmly. "Your father was appointed as a caretaker, not an owner. The documents are clear." Vanessa turned to her father. "Tell them, Daddy." Tell them this is wrong. Chief Raymond looked at his daughter, and something in his face, something that had been rigid for 2 decades, cracked open. He closed his eyes. He did not speak. That silence said everything the room needed to hear. Vanessa slowly sat back down. Her gold earrings caught the light. Her yellow dress suddenly looked very loud against the silence around her. The hall emptied slowly after the official finished speaking. People moved quietly, not with the noise of celebration, but with the hush of people processing something too large to hold in one moment. Chief Raymond was asked to remain and answer questions from the officials. His boys, who had always walked beside him with chest puffed and chin raised, now stood at a distance, confused about who they were protecting anymore. Raymond sat in his chair looking smaller than Ada had ever seen a powerful man look. He answered questions in a flat, tired voice. The grand certainty that had filled him for 22 years had left, quietly, all at once, the way heat leaves a fire when the last log dies. Vanessa walked out of the hall alone. Her friends, who had always appeared whenever she needed an audience, were nowhere to be found. She stood outside in the afternoon light, and for the first time, she did not know where to go or what to do with her hands. People walked past her. Some looked at her with pity. Some looked away quickly. The market woman who had always offered Vanessa free fruit to stay in her good graces passed without a word. A group of children ran by laughing at something else entirely, and even that small sound, joy that had nothing to do with her, felt like a rebuke. Vanessa stood there, yellow dress, gold earrings, and nothing else to hold on to. Eddie found her there. She had not been looking for her, she was walking with Mrs. Flora toward their car, but she saw her standing alone and stopped. For a long moment, the two girls just looked at each other. Vanessa's eyes were red. Her chin was trembling slightly. She opened her mouth twice before words finally came out. Ada, she said. I did not know. Ada waited. I am sorry, Vanessa said, and her voice broke in the middle of the second word, like a branch that had been carrying too much weight for too long. I am sorry for everything I said to you. For the market. For the celebration. For all of it. I did not know who you were. Ada looked at her carefully, not coldly, but with the kind of steady attention that means someone is really listening. Then she said, that is exactly the problem, Vanessa. You should have been kind to me even when you did not know who I was. Vanessa said nothing. Because there was nothing to say. Ada had not insulted her. Ada had not shouted or pointed or called a crowd to witness her shame. She had simply said the truest thing, the thing that cut deeper than any revenge, because it was not cruel. It was just correct. Ada nodded once, took Mrs. Flora's arm, and continued walking. Vanessa watched her go. And as she stood there, alone for the first time in her life in a way that had nothing to do with location, she began to understand something she had not been taught in any school, had not learned in any of her comfortable years, that power borrowed from another person is not power at all. And that the girl she had spent months calling poor had been, all along, the richest person she had ever met. 3 months passed. The village changed, not suddenly, like a storm, but slowly, like a season turning. Ada did not move into a big house. She did not replace Chief Raymond's chair with a golden one. She did not call the villagers together to remind them of what she now owned. She opened an office, a small, clean room at the back of the community hall, and she began meeting people. Traders. Elders. Teachers. Farmers. She listened to every one of them. She asked questions and wrote down the answers in a green notebook. She smiled when people were nervous. She offered water when people were thirsty. She was 20 years old, and she was doing the work of building something real out of a truth that had been buried for a very long time. Mrs. Flora's store remained in the market. Ada still visited it on Saturday mornings, not to sell, but to sit beside her auntie and drink tea and watch the market move. People greeted her differently now. They bowed slightly, or pressed their hands together, or simply said her name with a warmth that felt new. Kojo still came running, still missing his 2 front teeth, and sat beside her demanding stories. Ada still told them. But now the stories were changing. They were still about kings who did not look like kings. But they were also about villages that decided to become better. About people who chose truth when lies were easier. About forgiveness that did not mean forgetting, but meant choosing the future over the past. Chief Raymond had stepped down, not dramatically, not in a public ceremony of shame, but quietly, on a Tuesday morning, with a signed letter and a low voice. His family had left the big house. Ada had been asked, by the officials, whether she wished to pursue legal action. She had taken a long time to answer. Then she said, "Make sure all the money owed to the village is accounted for and returned. Use it for the school and the clinic." The official had blinked. And Raymond himself, he pressed. Ada had looked out of the window for a moment. "He is old," she said finally. "And he will live the rest of his life knowing what he did. That is not nothing." The official wrote it down and said nothing more. Vanessa came to Ada's office one afternoon, alone, carrying a small wrapped package. She stood at the door looking uncertain, which was a new expression on her face, like clothes she was still learning to wear. Ada looked up from her green notebook. "Come in," she said simply. Vanessa entered and placed the package on the desk. "I brought you something," she said. "It is not much. I just wanted to. I needed to come." Ada unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a small hand-carved wooden figure, the kind sold at the far end of the market by an old craftsman who had been selling them for 30 years. It was a figure of a girl carrying something on her head. Simple. Beautiful. Ada held it up and looked at it. "It reminded me of you," Vanessa said quietly. "At the store. Every morning." Ada set it down on her desk, right beside the green notebook. She looked at Vanessa, really looked at her, and said, "Sit down, Vanessa." Vanessa sat. And for the first time in their entire history, the two of them talked. Really talked. Not with cruelty, not with pride, not with secrets, just 2 young women, sitting in a small room, finding their way towards something that looked, slowly but surely, like a beginning. If this story taught you something, don't forget to like and subscribe. Because you never know, the person you look down on today might be the one who changes your life tomorrow. See you in the next story.